He's been called one of the most wanted political fugitives of 2018, as former Georgian President Mikheil Saakashvili faces possible extradition to his home country from his new country, Ukraine. I'll ask him if he's prepared for life behind bars. And later, I'll talk to Ilhan Omar, the Somali refugee turned US politician, about life in Trump's America. Mikheil Saakashvili, thanks for joining me on Up Front. You were twice elected president of Georgia and governed there for 9 years. And yet you're now a wanted man in Georgia. You've gone from president to fugitive. How does that feel?
No, I mean, I finished my presidential term and I finished it with quite a record. Georgia has been the most spectacular reform transformation case in this part of the world. But then we had the government after peaceful transition, first ever peaceful transition in this region, which from the very beginning said one of our main goals is to indict Saakashvili on no matter what. So in the end, they said, let us look for at least something. And finally, they gave me a sentence for presidential act of pardon, for pardoning prisoners. Well, that's the only case in modern world when president had been tried, not for corruption, not for other abuses, but for right of pardon.
Hold on, it wasn't the pardon, it was the cover-up that they alleged was associated with the pardon. Oh. But just for the benefit of our global audience, you could face up to 11 years in prison in Georgia for multiple charges dating back to your presidency there, including abuse of power. You've already been sentenced to 3 years behind bars. Earlier this week, an appeals court in Ukraine rejected your request for protection against extradition to Georgia. You're in Ukraine right now. It does look like you're on your way to prison, doesn't it? Regardless of how accurate you think the charges are.
I have to say, nobody in Georgia is expecting me. Georgian government, despite their formal announcements, are very scared that if I ever get extradited to Georgia, then they will be just wiped out by unhappy populists, where the present government is extremely unpopular. And I am a creator of modern Georgian state. We have very strong support among the people, but also
you say you have a lot of support amongst the Georgian people. We'll come back to that in a moment. But before we do, just to be clear, is it correct to say that as of now, as of today, this week, you are currently a stateless person because you gave up your Georgian citizenship in 2015 to pursue a career in politics in Ukraine, and then last July you were stripped of Ukrainian citizenship for allegedly providing false information on your registration form. So you're neither Ukrainian nor Georgian right now.
Yes. Formally, I'm a stateless person, but I'm appealing in the courts, and it's an ongoing case to get my citizenship back. Of course, under present legal system in Ukraine, there is a slim possibility I can do that because the president certainly is in control of the courts, and for him it's a very, very important case. But
You've had this big row. You mentioned the president. You've had this big row with President Poroshenko of Ukraine, who is a former friend and ally of yours. But just on this issue of you being in Ukraine, you're sitting in front of a Ukrainian flag. What made you, a former president of one country, Georgia, move to another country, Ukraine, and try and become prime minister of that country? Many would say that's pretty unpatriotic of a former president of Georgia to do.
First of all, there are historic precedents. Simon de Bolivar, there was such a great historic figure, was president of or leader of 5 Latin American countries. Okay. But on the other hand, if Ukraine fails, if Ukraine breaks up, if Russia is victorious in Ukraine, then Georgia, which is 10 times smaller, might disappear from the map. That's one big motivation I have. Second, I already had spent 13 years of my adult life in Ukraine. And I've been not only a participant of 2 Ukrainian Maidans, 2 Ukrainian revolutions or uprisings, I was one of their organizers, arguably at least of the first Maidan. So I'm heavily invested emotionally in Ukraine, and I have strong links to this country. And also I have people here.
You say you have strong links with the country, but Ukrainians don't seem to support you. A poll last December by the International Republican Institute showed that 75% of Ukrainians, 3 out of 4 people in that country, had either a somewhat or very unfavorable view of you. Why not just move on and let more viable, popular candidates run for office in Ukraine? You're not popular there.
Look. I mean, first of all, president of Ukraine, according to the same poll, is even more unpopular. Second, if you look at the poll numbers, every Ukrainian politician is doing rather bad, and that's the political crisis in this country. That basically the entire political class is hated.
Your party was polling at 1% at the end of last year. Your Ukrainian party, the Movement of New Forces, 1%. President Saakashvili.
No. Wait a minute. Between 1 and 7 and 8%, depending upon the polls. Second, president's party is not polling much better either. The problem is that the entire political spectrum needs to be reshuffled and needs to be changed. And that's exactly what we're trying to do. I stand up for the idea of modernized, democratic, European Ukraine with open economy, free of oligarchs, free of corruption, because corruption is killing the economy. And if the economy is being killed, if Ukraine doesn't get that double-digit growth, it will just disappear. Your whole entire region will become a mess.
You said earlier in the interview that the criminal charges against you in Georgia are all politically motivated. They're made up, and yet you also face criminal charges in Ukraine, where you are right now. In fact, you were supposed to come to a studio to do this interview, but I believe you were so worried about being arrested, we've had to do this via Skype. Isn't it a problem for you that wherever you go, whether Georgia, Ukraine, you're being accused of crimes?
The Ukrainians don't want to arrest me to try me. I told them, if you want to try me, because there is no evidence of any crimes I've committed here. No, they don't want to try me. They want to expel me from the country. They want to get rid of me. And that's entirely different game. And the reason why they want to get rid of me is that because they don't have real case against me, because I really crossed the path of oligarchs that want to further plunder the country. The country is potentially the wealthiest country in Europe because of resources. And right now it's the poorest country in Europe, GDP-wise, because 7 oligarchs hold hostages the entire wealth of the country. And they hold I'm there, and they regard me as their main enemy.
So you say you're the enemy of the oligarchs, and yet you quit as governor of the corruption-ridden Odessa region in southern Ukraine after just 18 months in 2016, without really making any dent in reducing that corruption or going after those oligarchs. And in fact, back in Georgia, one of the main charges against you relates to massive embezzlement of public funds by you.
Wait a minute. Let's go to Georgian charges. Not public funds, but presidential office expenses. The fact that they couldn't find any personal benefit from me, no personal accounts, no personal wealth, which is extremely rare in this region where everybody steals, like everybody steals. And we were the only case where absolute president had zero. I came with the same amount of wealth or whatever assets and left with the same ones. I've never been rich, and I'm not rich now. I'm even poorer now than I was before presidency.
So if you're so innocent, why not go back to Georgia and make the case that you're making to me in a court in your own former country, which you ran for 9 years?
Because European Court of Human Rights clearly said that in Georgia, they used preliminary detention for political purposes. Our former
Mikheil Saakashvili, do you know how odd it is to hear you quoting the ECHR against your own country's court system? When you were president for 9 years, they criticized you and that court system. You locked up hundreds of people, and you didn't have a problem with the Georgian court system then.
No,
you locked up your own defense minister on charges of money laundering, extortion, and abuse of power.
European Court never supported his case and supported the government, first of all. Second, yes, I'm proud that we locked up corrupt officials of my own government. When I became president, the country was absolutely corrupt, and it was a failed state. When I finished my presidency, state budget went up 11 times. Economy went up 4 times. Georgia became the 9th best place to do business in the world. Georgia is number 16 in terms of economic freedom index. When the United States
that's nothing to do with what I asked about the judicial system.
No. It's all about transparency. It's all about government. It's all about legal system. In fact, our judiciary is not ideal, and it's right now being controlled. Control was seized by biggest private shareholder of Russian Gazprom, with clear goal to jail me. So the fact is that he had clear goal to put me in preliminary detention for many years without even trying me, because this whole trial...
No, I understand your argument. All I'm asking is, do you understand anyone watching this interview might find it odd that when you're accused of corruption by a Georgian court, you say it's all biased, but when you accuse others of corruption, you lock them up, and you were criticized by human rights groups?
Not only I say it. The United States State Department said that charges were biased. The European Union said the same.
But they also criticized your arrests of people. You were criticized by the ECHR in 2011 when you were president. You were criticized by Human Rights Watch. You were criticized by Carnegie and various groups.
So what?
So what? What makes you a hypocrite is so what?
No, I'm sorry, I don't accept this.
That's what many would say, looking at the double standard.
No. I think you should select your words more carefully, because World Bank wrote a book when it said that the only case of successful transformation worldwide, indeed, Georgia was world's #1 reformist country.
Okay,
under the
I haven't questioned.
Okay. Wait a minute. You told me I locked up people. We locked up criminals. Georgia was one of the most criminal-ridden countries in the world.
You say you locked up. Okay, you say you locked up criminals. You say you locked up criminals, right? The ICG, the International Crisis Group, said that they were worried about your increasingly authoritarian behavior. Human Rights Watch said your government forces use violent, excessive force to disperse peaceful demonstrations in the capital. The International Committee to Protect Journalists pointed out that you shut down 2 television channels. These are not all criminals, Mikheil Saakashvili.
No, of course not. And I tell you, there was one rally when it was organized on Putin's money, and everybody knows that. Our security forces were not ideal, and we couldn't have turned Georgia into liberal democracies in 8 years' time. But the non-existing country was turned into the best reform example in Eurasia. No country had increased its credentials so well in 9 years' time. And this is a well-known fact. That's why I was invited in Ukraine. That's why I feel strong support among best young people, among young reformers, among well-educated Ukrainians as well as Georgians. That's how I feel it.
You mentioned Vladimir Putin. You're best known in the West and the wider world for being president of Georgia in 2008, when your then country went to war with Russia, and in just 5 days, nearly 1,000 people died, more than 100,000 people were displaced. An exhaustive 1,000-page report commissioned by the European Union, published in 2009, ultimately blamed Georgia. They blamed you, not Russia or Putin, for having started that war. Many would say, therefore, you have blood on your hands.
It's totally fake. They never blamed us, and especially not unilaterally. What they said is that Russian troops were first to enter Georgian territory, and indeed our military response to other countries' troops entering my territory, our territory, was regarded as the date of start of the war.
With respect, they didn't say that at all. I've got the report quotes here. They said it was Georgia. This is the diplomat who led the investigation. It was Georgia which triggered off the war when it attacked Shinkivali in South Ossetia with heavy artillery. It could not be verified that Russia was on the verge of a major attack, as you claimed. That's what the report says.
No, wait. Before that, read it very carefully. They said Russian troops we confirmed they were already inside the Georgian territory. And then your quote is valid. But when
my quote as well, the quote says it was Georgia which triggered off the war. That's you. You triggered a war that killed almost 1,000 people.
Wait a minute. They already entered. When they enter your territory, you respond. I would see that any president who doesn't respond to foreign army entering this territory is a traitor. Any president who doesn't use military force when you are being attacked is a traitor.
The report says you overplayed your hand and you acted in the heat of the moment with heavy artillery.
That's for God's sake. 100 times smaller country was invaded by 100 times bigger enemy. We were attacked and bombed by 200 Russian planes. We were attacked by 100,000 people army, and you didn't want us to even resist.
The report said, not me. I'm quoting the EU. I'm quoting an EU Commission report which says open hostilities began with a large-scale Georgian military operation. The question is whether it was justifiable under international law. It was not, says the report. Those are not my words, Mikheil Saakashvili. That's the words of an independent report commissioned by the EU.
One expert, and we have overwhelming evidence that it
wasn't one expert, it was several experts.
And we were responding, and sometimes there is also people who like to blame the victim. When you don't want to help the victim, they say, well, it's the victim behavior as well. I'm sorry.
So you believe the Swiss diplomat who led the investigation was biased against Georgia?
I believe that the facts are very stubborn. We were attacked. You cannot be blamed for being attacked. We were attacked, and this is the fact of life. We protected our sovereignty. They went towards our capital. They couldn't enter our capital because the United States intervened, because our army was heroic, because 6 president leaders of European countries came and stood under the Russian bombardments with our people in the city.
Just to be clear,
and they physically protected the country.
Just to be clear, no one on this show or in this interview is defending the Russians or Putin, and the report criticizes Russia very heavily. You're right about that, but it does say that you started the war in defiance of international law. You can reject that conclusion, but that's what the report says. Don't shoot the messenger.
I would see any country that is being entered by internal force, and then somebody says we violate international law. I'm sorry, but I'm an international lawyer. I'm a human rights lawyer.
Okay. Right now, just before we finish, right now you have neither Ukrainian nor Georgian citizenship. So what's next for you, Mikheil Saakashvili? Where are you going to be a year from now, 2 years from now?
I'll be fighting together with people of Ukraine and Georgia against Vladimir Putin's influence here for liberation of our country's territory from Russian enemies, from Russian hostile armies, but as well as from domestic oligarchs and corrupt elements that seize power in our countries and are killing prospects for our population. I think Ukraine will become superpower of Europe, and Georgia will be once again, the shining example of success and reforms worldwide, as it was under my leadership.
Mikheil Saakashvili, thank you for joining me on Upfront.
Thank you for inviting me.
Hers is a remarkable journey from a refugee camp in Africa to a state legislature in the United States. In 2016, Ilhan Omar became the country's first elected Somali-American lawmaker. Last year, Time magazine put her on the front cover, calling her one of the women who are changing the world. So, does the future of the US look more like her or Trump? She joins me now. Ilhan Omar, thanks for coming on Upfront. You were elected, aged just 33, to the Minnesota House of Representatives in November 2016. That was, of course, the same night that Donald Trump was elected president of the US. How did you feel that night? Was it a happy night for you, a sad night, a bit of both?
I think it was bittersweet. I joked with my campaign staff and campaign supporters that we stayed a little too long at our party because there was a lot of crying and a lot of people who were upset. But when the reporters asked me how I was feeling, I told them that I was actually optimistic and hopeful because I believed that this was going to be the awakening of our nation. People were going to be awoken from their complacency, and we were actually going to get to work in not only resisting but reshaping and restoring this country's promise.
And within just a few days of taking office, President Trump brought in his infamous travel ban, the Muslim ban. You're not just a Muslim immigrant to the United States, you're a former Muslim refugee who's from one of the countries on the banned list, Somalia. So do you think President Trump doesn't want people like you in the country? Because he says it's not personal, it's national security.
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, if we were really being honest about what could be masqueraded as a national security issue, we know that no one from any of these countries has ever posed a threat within this country. And so we know that for him and his supporters, this is just a political football, and they're using our communities and people who look like me as leverage.
You talk about him and his supporters. More than 1 million people in your state of Minnesota voted for Trump. He only lost that state, I think, by a percentage point and a half. Do you feel cut off, disconnected from a lot of your own constituents who clearly don't see Trump's Islamophobia or anti-immigrant rhetoric as disqualifying?
I mean, I think what we are seeing in Minnesota is people actually coming to terms with the kind of rhetoric that they thought was just that, rhetoric, now actually becoming policy. I don't think a lot of Minnesotans and a lot of the people in this country actually thought that he would implement. They voted because there was that economic anxiety. They believed this guy was going to be part of negotiating this country into better economic situation.
You really think it was economic anxiety, not cultural or racial anxiety, that drove them to pull the lever for Trump?
I don't think a lot of people understood that the people that he was talking about, the policies that he was talking about on the campaign trail were going to have an effect on the members of their community, the people that they've grown to appreciate to be part of their communities.
When you hear reports of your president referring to countries in Africa, including your own country of birth, Somalia, as S-hole countries, do you think that makes him a racist? Is Donald Trump a racist in your view?
I mean, I think there isn't a debate about whether Trump is a racist. I think he fits into every ism. But what is important is for people to actually understand the implication of those kind of descriptions that he attaches to countries. in Africa, in Haiti, in El Salvador. When we are having a conversation about what will ultimately make our country safe, it is about showing strong and principled leadership. It's about being the country that has been known to foster open and inclusive societies.
But you say there's no debate about whether Trump's a racist, and a lot of people would agree with you on that. And in fact, there's been an explosion in the number of anti-Muslim, far-right, white nationalist groups in the US over the past couple of years. Your own state of Minnesota experienced a record number of anti-Muslim incidents in 2016. You yourself, I believe, just a few weeks after your election victory, I think you had a cab driver call you filthy and ISIS and threaten to remove your hijab. How much do you hold Trump and the rise of Trump responsible for this explosion of US Islamophobia?
Oh, I would actually come very short of holding them exclusively responsible for the rise. I think when you demonize and dehumanize, it is easy for people to commit acts of violence against those individuals because they no longer see them as a person, as someone who has feelings, who's worthy of respect. And I think that is where we are moving away from the idea that we are supposed to be a welcoming nation.
A lot of conservatives in particular would say that the rise in Islamophobia is a result not of hate, but of fear, a legitimate fear, they say, of quote-unquote jihadist terrorism, whether it's Fort Hood or San Bernardino or the recent truck attack in New York. What do you say to them?
I would say our country should be more fearful of white men across our country because they are actually causing most of the deaths within this country. And so if fear was the driving force of policies to keep America safe, Americans safe inside of this country, we should be profiling, monitoring, and creating policies to fight the radicalization of white men.
But most of the funding and attention, even under Obama, obviously went towards Muslim communities. One of those communities is in Minnesota, your state, the Somali American community in Minnesota, where I think over the past few years, more than 20 young Somali Americans have left to go and fight for ISIL or Al-Shabaab or one of these quote-unquote jihadist groups abroad. That's a real threat, obviously. No one's pretending it's not a threat. So what do you do about it?
But I mean, I think, like I said, the focus of our policies should be about keeping Americans safe, keeping us domestically safe, and where we actually find a solution is looking at our foreign policy, looking at how we are engaging with the members of these communities, and the kind of rhetoric, right, like that is being spewed out of leaders within our city halls, within our state capitals, and within our nation's capital.
Some would say that's true. There's some really bad rhetoric coming from politicians, security leaders, etc. But also a lot of bad rhetoric coming from Muslim community leaders, imams, etc. Right. Is that fair?
I think both of those statements could be true, and I think it just goes to show what happens when you have segments within communities that are using fear and hate to mobilize their base. And it is important for us to actually have a conversation about what kind of communities we are trying to build and what this nation actually stands for.
In an interview last year, you said your campaign for state office was about more than you. It was about shifting, quote, the narrative about what is possible. For those outside of the US, we have a global audience watching, who look at the current US president, maybe think he defines the US now, his anti-immigrant, anti-minority, anti-Muslim sentiment. Do you see your story as a kind of foil, a counter-narrative to that? Are you personally the anti-Trump?
What I represent is an America that still allows people to fulfill that American dream. That you can come here at the age of 12 only knowing 2 phrases in English, have the opportunity to put yourself through school and ultimately defeat a 44-year incumbent to win a seat at the table, not only representing people that look like you, but a district that has a 70% white population. What I wanted people to know throughout my election was that this dream isn't closed off to people, that the idea that a person of color or women could only win and run in districts that looked like them was something that we needed to move away from.
Ilhan Omar, thanks for joining me on Upfront.
Thank you.
That's our show. Upfront will be back next week.